Thank you for inviting us to this terrific event. And it's really nice to see you, Andy.
Yeah, you too. No, it's absolutely my pleasure. I've been backstage listening to many of these, and so bringing my own questions, I'm extremely excited to be able to talk to you, especially about Aave's institutional program. I mean, this was announced not very long ago, a couple months ago, that you guys have been working with institutions. Tell me a little bit about the program and your role. What have you guys been working with?
Yeah. So, so Stani and I started talking about this whole what's next for DeFi around September, and the idea was to sort of evangelize and talk to institutions about DeFi. What we realized is that there was already an extraordinary amount of interest in DeFi from various institutions. Initially, obviously, market participants were crypto natives, degens, whales, developers. And then what we realized is that, based on the inbound interests on LinkedIn and everywhere, a lot of family offices, especially proprietary capital from institutions, was already coming into DeFi. Now, as we entered January and Feb, a lot of hedge funds and even asset managers really started asking lots of questions about how they can take advantage of some of the yield earning opportunities in DeFi. And so we started we've been speaking very actively to various investment banks, policy institutions, regulators, and so on about the potential of this technology. And what's been really interesting is that all of the participants are really excited about what DeFi can accomplish and what needs to happen. So in terms of the institutional interest, I think there's quite a bit of interest in the Aave in the Aave protocol and the ecosystem from a variety of institutional market participants, and and the progression has been from less regulated to more regulated institutions. Now, one of the things about quite a few US regulated entities, especially asset managers, is that the only way they can participate in DeFi, quite a few of those, is if there is a layer of KYC on the protocols, right? And now we strongly believe in permissionless protocols, right? Ethereum, for example, or Chainlink, for example, or an Aave protocol is permissionless too. Now, but in order to really enable access to DeFi for everyone, which has always been the vision, for Stani, Jordan, and the rest of us and the broader DeFi community, it's become pretty clear that there will need to be some sort of an option for institutions that require permissioned access to have that permissioned access, and that's why we're deploying Aave Arc.
So something you mentioned is a lot of institutions are coming inbound because of yield, right? Yield's kind of like is getting their attention, making them wonder what's going on. But you said they're excited about other things that they can do as well. So are they coming in excited about yield, and then they find out about there's a potential for less counterparty risk and some of those other benefits, or what are those conversations?
Yeah. So Aave has a terrific innovation ecosystem, right? So it's the core DeFi protocol is one thing that we have continued to the core DeFi protocol per se, but also real world assets, or what I prefer, off-chain assets. Crypto is as real world as anything, and NFTs, for example. Ito is we deployed Ito in May. There's been an extraordinary amount of interest in the NFT space. There has, Stani has been on Twitter talking about social, right? There's quite a bit of interest in where this can go from a Web3 perspective. So yes, everyone started coming for the yield, but they stayed for the innovation, right? So which is quite remarkable. Institutions want to participate in governance, right? So we will soon hear an announcement about enabling governance delegation through a major US regulated custodian. So these small innovations add up to a lot of interest in really high profile market participants in the institutional space are saying, if there is going to be this public chain infrastructure, right? If there is going to be this public in-market infrastructure, then what's our role in it? Are we going to be left out of it? Or are we actually going to be active participants and contribute and have some sort of influence and a stake in that? So there are quite a few long-term thinkers, and Ray Dalio has spoken about DeFi as clearing, right? As sort of and DeFi as a space for liquidity for the rest of the market. So there are quite a few long-term thinkers and a lot of talent and expertise on institutions, and people, and the yield goes up and down. But the innovation, I think, just the sheer amount of access to innovation and talent is.
So one question, who are the people who are in the institutions that are kind of championing this? Are there like degens in every bank and every hedge fund that are working their way up to VPs, or is it people who have heard and just like need to do that research, or is it all across the board?
It's actually all across the board, but it's the really senior people, people who kind of run some of these entities that kind of really see the long-term potential of what's going on. Sure, and everyone starts with Bitcoin, right? Everyone still starts with Bitcoin, and Ethereum definitely established itself as as sort of the default Web3 asset. But then once the institutions start with Bitcoin and come on to Ethereum, the path from there to DeFi is actually very, very quick. Now, who is getting involved? Yeah, all sorts of across the board. So we have seen a variety of participants. So we have seen people running these funds. So,
I think you're breaking up a little bit.
At the board.
And let's give you just one moment here. As you smooth out, if you can hear me, I'm gonna do a follow-up to my question. Not only who are these people, but kind of what is their knowledge level as well. It's okay. We'll get you back in just a minute. All right. Looks like Ajit is going to come back in the room in just a moment. Oh, no, you're still here. Your video is off. All right.
I'm still here. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So just Wi-Fi is not great. I think the gas fees are higher.
Network congestions. Okay, so who are these people and what's their knowledge level?
The knowledge level, has surprised us, to be honest. I think it varies. We do a lot of 101s at the far end of the institutional market. At the top end in terms of the most regulated institutions, we do a lot of 101s, but in terms of the quants and the hedge funds have always been very technology savvy. If you look at machine learning, cloud computing, big data, so there's just an extraordinary amount of investment that quant funds and others have made in technology over the years, and they have some really deep bench in terms of technical talent, and quite a few of these funds tend to be already quite up to speed in terms of the technology, right? And they're really often interested in how can we integrate directly, we can write some Solidity code here to do that. So that's also happened. And then there is obviously, the more traditional institutions, large banks, whether it's investment banks or retail banks, tend to be more at the early stage where, they really want to know what's going on. And then sometimes the conversations are about, can we deploy this technology in a private permissioned environment? And then, what's the value add of doing that? So there is a whole spectrum, but net, I think I've been quite pleasantly surprised by how far TradFi institutions have come in their expertise and knowledge of the Ethereum and Web.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, we had a guy from Fidelity Investments on in a Q&A, and he's been in blockchain for years, and he's within their blockchain desk. He's mined Bitcoin. He knows his way around. So, there are people in these institutions that have some base knowledge. That's for sure, and that's really encouraging. to know. I wish the audience could see. I got the Zoom background because Ajit turned off his video, and his profile picture here is a punk. So that's pretty exciting. We got some excellent representation of Ethereum here, at least. So they know their way around technology or give and take, but those that do, what are the questions that come up around compliance? Are they seeking guidance? Are they looking for a roadmap? Is it totally vary by region, or what's the compliance story? How are they approaching this?
Yeah, so the biggest consideration for when it comes to, especially comes to deploying client money, right, for asset managers managing other people's money, tends to be KYC and AML compliance. So transaction monitoring and making sure that all the participants in sort of the market are identified, and that's kind of how the Aave Arc market is deployed, right? So they will be regulated intermediaries. So Fireblocks are the first whitelister in the Aave Arc market, and there are some of the crypto banks that are coming on board as well. So these regulated intermediaries have the expertise and the permissions and the licenses to essentially provide that type of a service. Doing KYC, onboarding, having the right legal agreements and disclosure in place. Now, one of the key challenges for the industry is around smart contract security, as you're aware. So now having a permission pool also addresses that quite a bit, right? So because if every participant is identified and only identified participants can interact in a pool, then in an institutional setting, that takes away a lot of the risk of the economic attacks and the headline risk that people talk about and that people have heard of. So a lot of the institutional participants have heard of those headline risks, right? They read the same news. In fact, a lot of those subscribe to the Defiant and the Delphi newsletter and so on. All the things that we, which is quite encouraging, right? Now, I think one of the key challenges for the industry to address after the KYC and transaction monitoring bit is really the smart contract risk and insurance. Now, one of the things that's been key to our this process is making sure that any permission solution remains decentralized, right? So decentralization is not very well understood, and one of the things that I think we have led from the front on is really making sure that Aave Arc, even though we're building it in a permission way, remains decentralized and owned by by the Aave governance, right? So I think that tends to be a very interesting discussion with institutions, right? Because so I think in introducing this idea of decentralization, and then how do institutions participate in the governance, and how does that allow them to access the permissionless innovation ecosystem and contribute expertise? I think that's the really big story, right? And it tends to go really well.
When I think about the value of decentralization, to me, there's a number, but I think it's democratic, there's more access, it's permissionless, but it's also security. We do decentralization because it's more secure. It's a security feature. What really resonates with institutions on the value out of decentralization?
Yeah, so Stanley and I were, we did a presentation to the Bank of England, and so one of the things that I think one of the key parts of the conversation was, how resilient the DeFi infrastructure was on the 19th of May when, all the centralized exchanges were essentially down. And then, the Bank of England tend to have some of the best thinking on systemic risk, right? So when you say security, it's not just the technical security of decentralization, but also the transparency, automation, and, and what it does to, systemic risk reduction and overall financial resilience. It tends to be a very positive conversation with most institutions, right? And especially at the central banking end and financial stability end of the spectrum, the policy end of the spectrum. One of the biggest, I think, exciting features of DeFi is this transparency that decentralized governance brings, and we've had a lot of very positive conversations at that end of the market.
Well, resilience, as a backstop in financial terms makes a lot of sense to finance desks. And then in IT terms, having that double layer security, that resilience for IT systems, that probably resonates as well. So, just as a, speaking in those terms, I would assume resonates a little bit. So some of these institutions, there's the potential for a really significant influx of not only funds, but transactions as well. So are they thinking about scale? Are they asking about scaling solutions or multi-chain or cross-chain or any of these things for layer 2 to deal with some of the transaction throughput issues?
Yeah. So I think that yes, sometimes they are, but I think the key to all of this is to make things as simple as possible without making them too simple, right? As in, we wanted to create a solution that brings decentralization and gives institutions hands-on learning in the decentralization space, right? We didn't want to hide the complexity and the benefits of decentralization. Mm-hmm. So we built Arc that way. Now the second thing is and in that scenario, what a lot of institutions realize is that they cannot really compete with the type of permissionless access to talent, right? So anyone can contribute to Aave protocol, right? And it's purely meritocratic. They don't need a degree from Harvard or whatever. If they have something great to contribute, they contribute. And institutions realize that they cannot compete with the sort of permissionless Web3 innovation ecosystem that's being created, and that brings a lot of strategic interest in how do they access this innovation.
That's really fascinating. It lines up with a lot of the stories I feel like we've heard, starting last summer at DeFi Summer. This is how institutions will, start getting interested and start getting involved. And now we're seeing that come to fruition. And I very much thank Aave for taking some of these initial steps, Ajit. And I thank you so much for coming on. We're out of time. So is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up?
No, I think it's great to be here, and we've been very close friends of Chainlink for a long time, and let's continue to build great things together.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. This is SmartCon. What a fantastic conversation! I feel privileged to have got to ask a bunch of my questions, and I could honestly talk to you for a much longer time. Hey, so let's do it again sometime. We'll get together, have some tea, and talk about this.